Go. Yeah, so welcome everyone to this Forge online bootcamp. I'm Adam. About the event itself, I'm not sure if you've already attended one of the previous similar events, but the idea is that we have 4 days during the week, each day a different tutorial that we are going to go through. And also there's a parallel track each day, well, at least Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So one session, this current one, is about .NET, and the other session running parallel to this one is in Node.js, run by my colleague. So we have 4 days, and each day we have 4 sessions. So we divided up the material for each day into 4 separate parts. The first part will be always about, just setting up things, making sure that you have all the all required in order to get started with the sample. You have a Forge app, you have your development environment, and so on. And then during the session, we code, and you code with us as well. So we are going to show through the steps which are outlined in the online tutorials, which are available for you. And then you can try to follow it yourself afterwards. We give quite a bit of time for you to do that. And of course, in the meantime as well, you can ask questions. So there is a possibility in the Zoom environment. You can go on the Q&A part, and then you can ask questions, and we'll get back to you. So that's what happens between the sessions. So after I ran through the code and I talked about the code and giving you some background on what's happening inside that section of the tutorial, then I sort of go in the background, and in the meantime, you can ask questions. And also note, because this is something that people always ask, of course, this session will be recorded as well, just like the previous ones were. And then they will be published somewhere on YouTube. Probably we will blog about it on the Forge blog. So yes, Monday today is the first session. So this is about a simple viewer. It shows you, how you can create a so-called bucket on the Forge service where you can upload your files. And once you uploaded your file, you can also translate it into a format that our viewer understands. And then you can embed our viewer in your own web page and then show the models directly there. Both 2D and 3D models are available for that. And then tomorrow, we'll also show you how to do a similar thing, but from hubs. So there are various storage accounts available for our customers. There's BIM 360 Docs, now ACC or Autodesk Docs as well. There's Fusion Team, and I think, for example, BIM 360 Teams might still be available. So these are various, user-specific accounts where, you can log in with your Autodesk user ID, and then you can start creating your own projects, hubs, or folders, subfolders, upload your files, and then all the versioning is taken care of. So tomorrow we are going to show you how to access those accounts, allow your users or yourself to log into Forge and then list all the various hubs that you have access to, the projects, folders, files, and everything. And then on Wednesday, we are going to show you dashboards, which basically talks about how you can customize the viewer functionality, how you can create your own viewer extensions, which enables you to add functionality to the viewer itself. And then one of them will be about, getting or extracting all the properties out of the models that you're displaying inside the viewer, and then based on that data, create some kind of dashboard to, inform the user about, for example, what kind of materials are in the model, and then put a nice pie chart on the web page, things like that. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about configurators, which means that we would be using the design automation service that enables you to run the various main desktop products we have, AutoCAD, Inventor, Revit, and 3ds Max on the cloud in order to create new, specific, for example, inventor documents or modify existing inventor documents, Revit documents, AutoCAD documents, and so on, directly on our cloud instead of running it on your own computer. So that's what we are going to show you on Thursday. So the first session for today is, well, this is the simple viewer. You'll find the link here, the forge-tutorials.autodesk.io, tutorials as simple viewer. This is the sample we are going to go through today. So I can just go there right now. I can close this other one. Yeah, so this is the website, forge-tutorials.autodesk.io. If you attended one of the previous sessions, a couple of months ago, we had one as well, then you might have seen something called learnforge.autodesk.io. So we were working on this new material to make it even simpler, to follow without having, fancy JavaScript libraries being used and things like that. We try to keep it really, really simple. So hopefully you'll find, hopefully we succeeded. So first of all, it has this getting started section. Again, it will take you through all the steps you need to take in order to make sure you have the environment and Forge app, which enables you to create new applications. So first of all, it talks to you about the forge.autodesk.com website, where you can log in with your Autodesk ID in order to create a new Forge application. So it takes you through the various steps. You can just click on My Apps once you registered. So once I log in, this is what I see because I'm already running a trial with this third-party account. So if I logged in, then on the Forge account details, you will see that my trial is already running. If you haven't started the trial yet, then there should be a button that would enable you to get the trial started. I think it's pointed out somewhere here. Yeah, so sign up to try Forge. That would, I think, also get your Forge trial started, and then you will have access to this for about 3 months. And then once you're inside your Forge account, then you will have the option to create a new app. I think by default, all the various components will be selected that you can use, and then you just have to provide a bit of information, including the callback URL. This is the URL that will be used when you're doing a 3-legged authentication that will be needed tomorrow. So today we are only doing a 2-legged authentication, which is the simplest form of it, in which case, once you created your Forge application, you will get straight away a client ID, client secret, and you just need to pass that to a given endpoint on the Forge service, and straight away you get back an access token. The 3-legged authentication that we'll talk about tomorrow, that's a bit more complicated, and that we'll need this callback URL. But either way, when you're creating your application today, the best thing is to make sure that this callback URL is correct in case you're attending the session tomorrow as well. So it's listed here as well. This is the callback URL that you will need to use. And when you create your app, all the various components available for you will be listed. So here they are. And by default, you can just select them all to be on the safe side. That's fine. And once you created the app, you will have your client ID, client secret, and that's really all you need in order to get started with the various tutorials that we are going to take you through this week. And this section is also for tomorrow. So if you have BIM 360 Docs or Autodesk Docs, which is the ACC Docs basically account, in that case, you also have to provision the given Forge app that you created for that BIM 360 or ACC account. That's the only way that it will be able to access the hubs from there. But this section is for tomorrow. So just getting back to the Forge website, forge.autodesk.com. When you click on documentation, you will see the various components that are available for you. Authentication is one that pretty much everyone needs to use because you created your Forge app, then you need to get an access token, you need to authenticate with the service. So that's definitely one component you will always run into. But beyond that, today we'll also look at the data management. So this will enable us to create, as I said, buckets on the Forge server. Buckets are like folders where you can upload your files. We'll also use model derivative service. This enables you to translate files into other formats, including to the SVF format, which is being used by our viewer. And then, of course, we also use the viewer itself, the viewer SDK, which enables you to embed this viewer component in your own web page in order to display the models. So again, today we are going to use these 4 components: the authentication, data management, model derivative, and viewer SDK. Yeah, so this getting started part was about, just simply creating an application, going to forge.autodesk.com, log in with your Autodesk account, then go to create a new app, specify all the information, well, just a couple of pieces of information that you need to provide actually. Make sure you have the correct callback URL, and just select all the components. I think that's what happens by default. And then you create the app, and that's it. And then just take a note of this client ID, client secret. You can store it somewhere, or you can always just go back to the Forge website when you need that information for the app. Now about environment setup, because we are going to be working with .NET, where we decided to go with, there are 2 options, the 2 main options to go with. So you could be using Visual Studio Code as well, which is a simpler version of Visual Studio. But I think in our experience, most people who are actually using .NET tend to have Visual Studio already. Maybe they are, writing add-ins for Revit, AutoCAD, or Inventor already, so they have access to Visual Studio. They are more familiar with it. So we are just going to be going with that. And in case of this tutorial today and tomorrow, and I think probably Wednesday as well. Wednesday is a separate one. I think that's a single session. But today and tomorrow, we are going to be going with Visual Studio 2022. And it has a free version as well, the community version, which you can download and use for free. You could just play around with it a bit. And that's what we are going to use in this session today as well. Just make sure when you're installing it that you select ASP.NET and web development plus the .NET desktop development as well, these 2 components. And that should really be it. I'm not sure if we actually provided. Yeah, here is also the link, so we can just click on it. And then you can just download Visual Studio. So it is quite straightforward to get started with it. And now let's go back to the presentation. So again, just a quick overview of what we are going to go through today. So this first part was just intro and setup. Again, you just need to make sure you have a Forge app created and you have Visual Studio 2022 installed. That's all you need currently in the that's everything we covered in this first session. Then from now on, I will be in the background just looking for questions coming in from you. So I'm going to be answering those. And the next session will come at 9:30 a.m. All times are in GMT, which might be a bit confusing because I think currently during the summertime, no one is actually using GMT anywhere. So even in the UK, we are now using something called the British Summertime, BST, which is GMT +1. And then in Europe, people are using Central European Summertime, which is GMT +2. So depending on where you are, you just have to transform these times, accordingly. But anyway, so this should be coming up then. Again, just quickly going through the prerequisites. Go to forge.hotels.com, make sure you created your app, download 2022, install it, make sure it has these two components selected when you're installing Visual Studio, ASP.NET and web development, .NET desktop development. And that's really it. So I already went through it. So now this is your turn, because probably while I'm doing things, you can't do things, just follow all the steps in the background. So now it's your turn. You can go through these steps. And as I said, I will be just, checking the Q&A panel in the background. If you have any questions, I will get back to you. Yeah, well, good luck with it. Okay, so let's continue with the second session for today. So hopefully you managed to get through these steps, which is creating your Forge account, creating your Forge app, which will then provide you with the credentials that you will need to use in your application, and also install Visual Studio Community 2022. So now we'll get started creating the app and also creating the server and authentication parts. So the architecture is what most of web applications tend to use. So on the server side, we are storing all the various files that our application needs, including all the HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and other files, images, and so on. And then when you loading, the given web page, then of course the browser is going to fetch all the relevant parts, the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files and images and the rest automatically, and then display it for you. And then inside our application, when you want to interact with Forge, in order to hide the access token that we are using to access Forge, therefore we keep all that part on the server side. So what will happen is that on the server side, we are going to be exposing so-called endpoints that our server is going to be listening on, including one endpoint for getting, for example, the token for the viewer, or getting the list of buckets that we have access to, and the rest. And then our client-side code using the fetch API from JavaScript is just going to talk to the server. Then the server is going to reach out using the given access token to the Forge services, get the response back, and pass it back down to the client. And only the viewer will talk directly to the Forge services using a token which only has limited access to things. So we have something called scopes, which is like an extra layer of security. So we have a scope for viewables read, data read, buckets read, and the rest. And the viewer only requires the scope, which is viewables read. And that scope, an access token with that specific scope, the only thing it can do is just view these SVF files in order to show the model. It does not enable anyone to find out what sort of buckets you have, what files you have, and things like that, or download the file, upload the file. It doesn't allow anyone to do any of those things. So that's why it's quite safe to pass that kind of access token to the client-side code. But the other, what we usually call like internal access token, which has ability to create buckets, delete buckets, and loads of other things, we keep that access token on the server side, so we never expose it to the client, so that some third party could hack this or take advantage of that access token. So we keep that internal access token, we keep that on the server side, and then we are directly communicating with Forge services that way. But on the client side, we have a single token, which is very limited, Again, this is using a scope called the viewables read. So then it will be able to talk directly to the Forge services in order to display a given model. So that's how it's going to be working. So all the functionality which is required to interact with the Forge services, they will be part of the so-called services. As you will see it in the sample, it will be like Forge services.cs and Forge services.authentication.cs. All those files are about accessing Forge services. And then we are going to expose these endpoints, as I mentioned, that the client side will be able to call directly or reach out to the server in order to, get all the Forge functionality. So now the steps we have to go through, we already have Visual Studio 2022, so we can just start it up, create a new project, and also install the dependencies that we are going to be using from the project, including the Forge NuGet package. And then we have to prepare application configuration. We'll modify the startup.cs file and also modify the app settings development JSON. That's where we are going to be placing all the client side or all the credentials, the client ID and client secret. And then we create a basic server inside the programs.cs file, and then we'll also test it out just to make sure that everything is running so far. And then we'll create the first services. So this is again the Forge service.cs file and the Forge service.auth.cs file. So these are the files where we are going to generate the code that we'll be talking directly to the Forge services from the server. And then we are going to expose a server-side endpoint inside the auth controller file that our client-side code, using JavaScript from the browser, we'll be able to access and call. And then we are going to test that out as well. Yeah, so we go to the demo part, which basically means I'm going to start up Visual Studio 2022, and then we are going to create a new project. So you can just create a new project. I'm just going to follow directly here the same steps that you will need to be following as well from the website. So let's just see what we have to do. So this is again the website. So first of all, the application setup, we are following this section, the .NET 6 and Visual Studio 2022. Here are the steps. So creating a new project. We're going to be going with an ESP.NET Core empty project. So just look for that. In my experience, the easiest is if you just search for empty, and then you'll find it straight away. So you can just type here empty, and ESP.NET Core empty is right there. So just select that, next. And best thing is just keep the application name exactly as you see it. So in this case, my Forge app, because all the namespaces and everything will be set up that way. So in order to avoid confusion, best thing is to stick with everything as exactly as is, as shown on the web page. So my Forge app. And in this case, we can also go with .NET 6. So that's what we are going to do. We don't really care about HTTPS. That might just add the extra complication. And this is just a test application, so we can just do things without that. So again, we are going with .NET 6. We don't have to care about HTTPS or anything else. And then we can just create a project. Yeah, so that's done. And now we can set up a couple of things. First of all, we need to create some folders. One will be for the controllers. So this folder will contain the files which will be exposing endpoints on our server that the client-side code will be able to call. So let's just quickly create those. So first folder, add folder, there you go. And then the models, this will contain, as it says, all the server-side logic that can be shared by different endpoints. So these files will contain the functionality which will be talking directly to the Forge services. So you can just create that as well. And then in www root, we will place everything that the browser will have access to. So the HTML file, JavaScript, CSS files, or that it needs to download in order to present our web page to the user. So those all will go inside the www root. And the funny thing is when you create this folder, it will automatically change the icon for it into a globe. That's how you know that you did not made a typo in the name. So if you named it correctly, it is www root, and automatically the icon for it will change into a globe. And now we need to add a couple of NuGet packages, including one for the Forge SDK. So what you can do is you can just right click on the project, and then you can manage your NuGet packages. And then go to browse and go to Forge. That's the one, Autodesk Forge. That's what you need. You can simply go with the latest version because we are using the latest version of .NET as well. So we can use the latest version of these NuGet packages. So just click install. Okay. What else do we have? So that was the Autodesk Forge package. I thought we needed some other packages as well, but we'll find out. Yeah, maybe we don't need more in this specific sample. Okay, so we can get on to actually start modifying the application that we created. So first of all, we'll go to startup.cs and make sure that we have this content in there. So you can simply click on this icon here to copy the content. Which one was it? It was startup.cs. Yeah, so we just create it directly in the root folder. I thought suddenly that this file already exists, but no. So we just need to create it first. So add new item. And you can just go with class. So it's startup.cs. And now we can just select the whole thing and then simply rewrite it with the content that we provided here. So as you can see, it's just going to set up various things, including fetching the client ID and client secret or Forge bucket, which is optional, from the settings file that we are going to be modifying in a second. I think that's coming up right now. Yeah, so that will be the app settings development, the JSON. And we are storing that all this information in this specific file because in this case, it's in a separate file that you might not have to, make part of your GitHub project, so you do not accidentally check in all your client ID and client secret into, for example, a public repo on GitHub and then expose it to others, which wouldn't really be a good idea. That's why we do it like this. So instead of putting it directly in app settings.json, we are putting it in app settings.development.json. So we can just add all this information there. You can see this is already available there. So what we have to add is this section. This would be an optional name of existing bucket if you wanted to provide that. And here, so someone was already asking, where you will need to use the credentials from the Forge app that you created on the website. So this is where you will need to edit. So you can just go back to your Forge app. I'm not going to paste it in here because then you see my client secret, but the idea is that you can just add in your client ID. Exposing client ID is not a big issue. In case of some of the apps, we are actively doing it so that, for example, third parties will be able to enable or give an applications access to their Pin360 account if that's what they want. But the client secret, you should keep it secret. That's why it's called a secret. But you can just simply copy it from your own Forge application from the forge.autodesk.com website and then replace it here. And here it is again, just explaining why we are storing, all these settings inside the app settings.development.json. So I think I hopefully didn't miss anything. Yes, so we just created the startup CS. We modified the app settings development JSON. And now we can start modifying the program CS file. So again, just copy the content from here. And we can go to program.cs. You can see it looks pretty different from the code that we are going to be using. So we just select everything and then overwrite it. And here's the explanation. So with this code, .NET application will start the ASP.NET server with the configuration defined in startup class. And then finally, we also going to modify the load setting JSON because as you've seen, in case of these samples during the week, we are going to be using the 8080 port instead of, for example, the 3000 that we were using in the previous tutorials a couple of months ago. And in order to change that, you have to go into this file, the load settings.json, and you will have to look for this application URL and make sure it will be changed to 8080. So load settings.json, there it is under the properties. And just change it to 8080. Oops, 8080. And then of course, we should just save everything. You can just simply click save all. Make sure we are not losing any of these changes. And you can already try the sample if you want to. As it says, since we did not provide any of the files yet that the browser would be using in order to display something for the user, the HTML page, maybe the CSS file for the styling, we haven't provided any of those. Therefore, you will just simply get back 404 when running the sample, but we can test it. So we can just run my Forge app and then let's see what happens. I think by default, it should just automatically bring up the browser, but it does not seem to for some reason. There it is. Okay, it just takes a bit of time. But as we said, we are not expecting much from it. We'll get back an HTTP 404 because, as I said, we don't have any resources to display yet. So our server is currently not handling the root request. That's why it will provide a 404 message. And so, as I said, it's as expected. Accidentally, I clicked something there. I don't know what that was. So we got this far. Now we can handle authentication as well. So let's go to the next section. So I already talked about it, as part of the presentation slide. If I go back there, I don't know where I left it. So here it is. That, we have an access token that we keep just on the server. We are not exposing it to the client side so that third parties could, abuse that access token or misuse that access token. Therefore, we have one which is just for internal use on the server side, and then one that we are also passing down to the client, basically for the viewer, so that it will be able to just display the models directly from the Ford server. And here we are talking about that. So that's why it's a good practice, that we have an internal token kept on the server side. And then we also have a so-called public token that we are passing down to the client side for the viewer. Okay, so we can start implementing these Ford services, which will be interacting with the Ford servers. So first of all, we are creating a Ford service.cs file under the models subfolder. So you can just click on models and then add new item. I could have probably set controller as well. It doesn't really matter because we are going to be, completely change the content of it anyway. So here is Ford service.cs, and then you can just simply copy the content from here. So as you can see, by default, it just sets up a couple of things like the client's ID, client secret, and the name of the bucket that we would be using. But now we are adding additional sections to this given class. As you can see, it's just a partial class. So it will be divided into multiple files, depending, for each given Ford service that we are using, we are going to be creating a separate file for it. So the next file we are creating is Ford service authentication. This will be using the authentication endpoints from the Ford server. So we can just go to models and then again add a new item. What's going on with my? Yeah, sometimes it gets a bit funny. Sometimes it's a bit slow. So anyway, we are creating a new class again. So Ford service auth CS, and we are going to change the content completely. We'll just copy things from here. And as you can see, it's going to be using the Forge SDK for .NET, the Autodesk Forge NuGet package, in order to interact with the Forge services. And all these functions are related to authentication. As you can see, one is about, getting a token, getting a public token, and getting an internal token. So the public token, again, is the one that we are going to be passing down to the client. And the internal token is that we are only going to be using on the server side in order to interact with Forge services, creating a bucket, uploading a file, getting the file translated, all those things. So for that, we are going to be using the internal token. And here is the list of scopes that I mentioned. So the scopes are like an extra layer of security. So if you have an access token which has only this scope enabled for it, then that's the only thing it can do. It won't be able to create a bucket. It won't be able to read from a bucket. Won't be able to read the contents of a file, download it, or upload a new file, and things like that. It will only be able to display models in the viewer. That's all. So, and that's why this is the public token that we are going to be passing down to the client side. But the internal token will be able to do all these things. So creating bucket, reading contents of the bucket, reading files, writing files, new content. So this is all about authentication. Now let's update the startup CS file to make a singleton instance of the Forge service. So it usually, when you're going through these steps, it's going to be highlighting the changes. You can also double check just to make sure everything is as you expect it to be. So if you are going back to startup.cs, you can see that all the content should be exactly the same. You can check if this does have this if section. And then yes, that last part is missing where we are adding the Forge services. So that's all the change we needed to make in the startup.cs file. Just add that extra line on line 28. It's highlighted here. And now we are also going to be exposing an endpoint on our server so that then the client will be able to get that public access token. And that's what we are doing inside the auth controller.cs file. So we can just create that under the controllers subfolder. So we can click on controllers, add new item. Okay. And then here's the content that we need to use for it. So you can just override the whole thing. And as you can see inside this controller, we are exposing a single endpoint, which is the token. So it will be from the client side, when the client is calling this endpoint, it will be under localhost.8080/API OAuth, because the controller is called OAuth or auth, AUTH, and then /token. So that will be API AUTH/token. That will be the endpoint the client will be using. And when the client is calling that endpoint, it will be a get endpoint. Then we are going to be reaching out to the Forge services in order to get back an access token based on the client ID, client secret, and then the scope we specified, which is viewables read. So when the client calls this endpoint, we reach out to Forge, we get back the access token, and then pass it back down to the client so that the viewer will be able to use that access token. That's what's happening here. So again, we can just click Save All. And then we should be able to try it out. But in order to do that, I would actually have to provide the client secret as well so that I can show you that it's working. So let's try to use a different application where I don't mind exposing my. Here it is. This is a temp one. As you can see, the callback URL is not correct for this one, for the app, so I'm going to change that later. But just to use the credentials, so I can go back again, it's app settings.development.json. That's where I need to update the credentials. And now that I have all this, I have a client ID, client secret, where the bucket is just a made up name at the moment. And I think I don't even have to specify it. But at this stage in the tutorial, you definitely don't even need this. The only thing we are going to be testing now is that the application will be able to generate a public access token for us. So when we run the application, of course, by default, the root is going to be displayed in the browser. And of course, we still don't have the HTML file. There's nothing to display there. We're still going to go get a 404 error, but then we can specify a given path where the application is asking for an access token, as shown in the picture here. So you can see localhost 8080 API OAuth token. So that path should work. So when you're accessing that, and hopefully our application should be able to reach out. Yeah. And successfully we got back an access token. It also tells us when it's going to expire. When you create an access token, it tends to be around an hour. So that should be it. So 3600, that should be an hour. Yeah, so I think that's how far we are supposed to be going in session 2. Just double check it. Exactly. So application setup and authentication, we've gone through all these. So again, the models part is all the functionality related to reaching out to the 4 services directly from the server. And the controllers is about exposing endpoints on our server that the client-side code will be able to call. So that's how far we got. And I think someone was asking about, can you share the Forge tutorial link? And of course, so simple viewer. This is the tutorial that we are going through now. So I just simply put it in the chat as well. So that's where you're going to find it. Yeah, so now it's your turn to go through all these steps which are outlined in the tutorial. And then in the meantime, again, I will be monitoring the Q&A panel. And if you have any questions, I will get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, so we can continue with the 3rd session for today. So hopefully you managed to finish this part. I've seen someone is having an error. I'm going to look into that afterwards. So, but hopefully most of you managed to go through this with the application setup. We just created a new app and implemented authentication in it as well. So now the 3rd session should be handling the part of uploading the file to our bucket and then also then getting them translated. So just like previously, under the models and Forge service files, so Forge service OSS and Forge service deriv.cs file, we are implementing the code which is talking directly from the server to the Forge services, and there we can use our internal access token that we are always keeping on the server, not exposing to the client side. And then we are implementing an endpoint under the controllers, which will then enable our client-side code to then call our server in order to get what it needs, including, start the generation of a bucket, uploading the file, and then later on, getting things translated as well. So that's what we are going to add there. And final step, we are going to actually test it. So again, we just have to keep following, what's written in the tutorials as the steps. So the first part now will be the data management section. So we already have some Forge services files. We'll have to add a couple of new ones. So the first one will be the OSS part. That's the object storage service, which is about, creating buckets, uploading files, downloading files, deleting files. So we can go back to the app. And then this should be a Forge service. So we need to add it under the models folder. So click on models, right click on models, add new item, and just select a class. And then just copy the whole content. So again, this is using the Forge NuGet package in order to, talk to the Forge services. And as you can see, inside these functions, we are using the internal token, all of, everywhere. So when you're uploading a model or when you're making sure that the given bucket exists. So here we get the name of the bucket that we want to check. And first of all, we're trying to get the details of the bucket. And of course, if it throws an error because the bucket doesn't exist yet, then we know that we still need to create the bucket. So we are calling the create bucket async. And that's it really. And the other part, once we have the bucket and now we are uploading the file, we are going to use this function from the Forge SDK called the upload object async. And then we are also implementing something in order to get back all the files which are stored inside the bucket. So then once you uploaded the file, there will be a drop-down button in the user interface where we are going to list all the files which are available in the bucket, and then you can select the file that you want to view inside the viewer. And that's really it. So this is all the server-side function when talking directly to the Forge service. And then just one caution about the naming of the bucket. So the bucket name has always need to be globally unique. So no other bucket needs to, no other bucket with the same name can exist already. So what we tend to do is, if you want to make sure that it is a unique name indeed, is just simply take the client ID of your Forge app, which is pretty much a random string, and then you can add some additional name to it if you want it, like a temp folder or new folder, whatever you want to name it, and that will be just added to it with a underscore and then the name you actually want to use. That's how we tend to make sure that it's going to be a unique name. And I've seen it somewhere already here. I think, was it in the Forge services? Yeah, exactly. So if you look into the Forge services.cs file, there you can see that if the bucket name when is not specified when we are creating this Forge service, if you remember, I think we are setting it up. Is it in the programs? No, in the startup. So here is where we are setting up the service. So we are passing in the Forge bucket that we are also getting from the configuration file. And this is the configuration file, the app settings.development.json. So if we already specified here something, then we are trying to use that specific name. But again, just make sure that is globally unique name. Otherwise, we are going to use that technique that I mentioned before, so that we are going to simply use the client ID. So the bucket names can only be lowercase. So that's why we are turning the client ID to lower. So as you can see, we are taking the client ID of the app and adding some additional string to it, the name of the bucket that we want to use. And this is how we are trying to make sure that indeed the name of the bucket will be globally unique. So we will be able to create that bucket. So that's the data management part. Again, creating the bucket, uploading files. Now we also need to use the derivative services in order to translate the file that we have. Again, this we are going to the models subfolder. So again, right click on models, add new item, class. You can just change the name. And just copy everything and overwrite the whole thing. And as you can see here, basically we have two main functions that we are going to be exposing through endpoints in the coming file. So first one is just kicking off the translation itself. So we will be specifying that we want to translate the given file to an SVF, which the viewer will be able to display inside our web page. And the second one will be about getting translation status. And the way you do it is you will ask for the manifest of the given file. So the manifest is like a file keeping a track of all the various translations that you've requested so far for the given file. So you say, let's say you have myhouse.rbt, a Revit file, and then you retrieve the manifest for the given file, then you will see all the various translations that you already requested for that file format. In our case, it will just be the SVF part, because that's the only translation we are going to be triggering from this sample app. And then you will also be able to see for each translation the progress, how far it progressed, whether it's 50% done, 75%, and so on. Or if for some reason it failed, let's say you have a bad file that you uploaded, or you didn't upload the file properly, maybe in the somehow some of the bits are missing or something, so the translation failed, all that information will be available from the manifest. So that's what we are doing, getting an up-to-date manifest in order to find out how far our translation to SVF progressed. So that's what we are doing here. As you can see, we are just checking the status and then the progress. And then is there anything else? And now we are, so this part is always the models is communicating directly from our server to the Ford servers. And now in the controllers, we are going to be exposing endpoints that we'll be using or taking advantage of these functionalities. So now on the controllers, right click on controllers, new item, just select class and then change the name. And now we are going to be exposing this functionality to the client-side code. So here are a couple of endpoints. I think actually, is it just one? No, there are two. So one of the endpoints is a post endpoint. So you need to send a post HTTP request from the client-side code from JavaScript to the given endpoint. Will be API/models. So you can send a post request to API/models, because that's the name of the controller, which is here, which is models. And then you can just pass some information, and then mainly the URN of the given file that you want to translate. And then we are going to, translate those files. And then what else are we doing? Here's the status of the translation, how far it's progressed. And for that, we are using, again, the service that we implemented, in this case, calling the get translation status. And this will be exposed under API/models/ the URN of the file that you want to, whose status you want to check, and then /status. So you can send a GET request to that endpoint, and then the client-side code will be able to check, how far the SVF translation progressed. And we should be able to try it out again. If you were to just go to the root, then we still don't have any of the HTML, CSS files that we would need in order to display something for the user. So that will still be a 404 error. But we can check a specific endpoint, which is the localhost 8080 API models, in order to check if there are any models available for us. Yeah, by default, because we still haven't uploaded anything, it should be just pretty much empty. So an empty array is what we are getting back. But okay, so let's give it a try. By the way, I mean, if you're familiar with working with Visual Studio, you know you can also put in like breakpoints and things. So you could just simply put here a breakpoint, and this should be hit because that's the endpoint we will be calling. So again, 404 on the root because we still don't have anything implemented, so that's missing. But this should be there. As you can see, we hit that endpoint, which is the API/models get on it. And then it comes in here, and we are just simply calling the Ford services get object. And then let's see what happens. Yeah, so probably we got an error because my guess is that, yeah, exactly. So I specified a bucket name, but it's not unique. So I guess someone else was running this sample already and actually created this a bucket with this specific name on their account. So of course they run into this error. So what you can do is either just not provide, I think that would be one option, is simply not provide any name for the bucket. Let's just. In which case it's going to use, the client ID plus I can't remember what the name was now, but it will be a unique name. So hopefully this time around we shouldn't run into any issues. So it's going to see that the bucket does not exist yet. So in the background, it already created the bucket, and then it checked what files are already available in the bucket. And of course, because it's a newly created bucket, there's absolutely nothing in it. So we get back an empty array. But again, if you've run into the previous error, then the two solutions is either make sure that you are providing here a globally unique name, so you can come up with something, pretty random that you're quite sure no one else is using yet, or just simply comment out the forge bucket section, this line inside the app settings.development.json file. So these are the two options. Either comment it out or make sure that the value is something pretty random enough to make sure that it's a globally unique name. And again, it always has to be just lowercase letters. And that's pretty much it. So we covered now the session 3 as well. So there's one thing remaining that will be related to actually creating our web page and embedding the viewer in it, and then displaying the model that we created, that we upload and then translate. So again, now this is your part. Now you have to implement everything that we just did, go through the exact same steps. In the meantime, I will be monitoring the Q&A panel. If you have any questions, I can see there is one already. So I will handle that. So good luck with these steps. Yeah, welcome back. So we reached the final session for today. So I hope you managed to go through these steps. Yeah, so implementing the server-side functionality for listing files and uploading files, translating them, and also provide an endpoint for this functionality so that your client-side code will be able to access that. And now the last part is viewer and UI. So let's get to it. And now we are going to add all the user interface parts. So when we start the application, we start running the web page. When the user just sees the web page, the browser opens up with the root. And then straight away the web page will show up or with all the components for it. So in order to do that, we need a couple of things. We have like 2 JavaScript files One is specifically for all the viewer related functionalities, and then the other one is generic functionalities, like for example, getting all the buckets or listing all the contents in the buckets. And then of course we have an HTML page and the relevant style sheets for it. So we can just start going through again the steps. So now this is just this last part. Okay, so adding the viewer logic. We already created the www root folder. As I mentioned previously, that's where all the content which will be available for the browser will be stored. So the JavaScript files, the HTML files, and the CSS files. And later on, if you wanted to embed some images in your web page as well, those as well would go into that folder. So first of all, let's create this viewer.js file. So I can go back here. I just right click on www root and then add new item. And this should be a JavaScript file. And I just change the name straight away. So it will be viewer.js. So just lower key, everything. You can just copy all the code. Yeah, so here you can see how the client-side code is taking advantage of the endpoints that we implemented as part of the controllers. So all the endpoints that we exposed are exposed in these two files. And again, all the server-side functionality when our server is talking directly to the Ford services are implemented here. So these are the endpoints, auth controller and models controller. So as you can see, one of the things we are doing from the client-side code is we are calling this API auth token. So it must be implemented somewhere, right? So it's implemented in OAuth controller, so you can just double click on it. And you can see it's exactly the same path. API / name of the controller, well, in small letters, so it will be auth, and then / token. That's what the client-side code will be calling. In order to get back, and this will be the public-facing access token that will be exposed to the client-side code. And then we have also the part where we are initializing the viewer. So we just have to pass in the container that will be sort of embedding the viewer in our web page. We are also automatically loading this extension. As I said, extensions are the way that you can add functionality to the viewer. I mean, you could add in a different way as well, but that's the nicest way to do it. So you can just package all the extra functionalities that you want to add to the viewer into so-called extensions. They are like, add-ins, for example, in case of desktop applications. That's how you could think of them. And one of them is called the Autodesk Document Browser. There are many which are available for the viewer by default, and then you can just say, yes, I want to take advantage of that extension, and you can specify it as part of, for example, the config, or you can load it also explicitly later on. You can say viewer.load extension and then pass in the name of the extension that you want to load. And it's a really cool extension. I'm going to show it later anyway, so it will make it easy to navigate all the components inside the document. Yeah, I will talk about it once we are actually running the sample, and then this extension will show up inside the viewer. So this is the part we are doing. We are just initializing the viewer. You only have to call that once. Then we are creating an instance of this viewer. Again, we are passing in the container, usually some kind of div, in which we want to embed the viewer, and we can pass in some config settings, including what extensions you want to load automatically. Then we say viewer start, and then we can start loading models as well afterwards. So here as well, you can see inside the function we are passing in the viewer instance, and then also the URN, the identifier of the file that you want to show inside the viewer. And then you can just call this document load, passing the URN is in this certain way. So the URN would be the base64 encoded version of the identifier, where you will see it once we debug into the code, you will see all these values actually. But this is how it always has to be. It's URN colon and then the base64 encoded version of the URN. Yeah, so this is one of the JavaScript files. We have also another one. I'll just quickly save it. Yeah, we have another one coming. Let's see what else we are talking about. Yeah, again, he's just talking about init viewer, load model, and also the get access token that I showed you. So here's the next JavaScript file we also need to add. Again, just right click on www root, new item, JavaScript file, name it straight away. So main.js. And then just copy all the content. So as you can see, once the web page is loaded, this function will be called, where we are going to be setting up the model selection as well. As you can see, it's going to be calling this endpoint. Since it's an endpoint, the call is going from the client to our server, therefore it must be implemented somewhere. So where is it implemented? It must be one of the controllers. So in this case, because we are asking for the available models in the given bucket, it must be in the models controller. So you can just go there and then just look for it. So here it is, HTTP GET. So API /models get, that will take you to this section where we are simply just getting all the objects inside our folder. That's all this service is doing. And the 4 service implementations are all here under the models subfolder. And depending on what you're doing, for example, getting all the files from the given bucket, it must be in the OSS, which is the object storage service that deals with, buckets, files inside those buckets. So then you should be able to find it here. So there it is, get objects. First of all, it just makes sure the bucket exists, and then gets all the objects inside the bucket. And then what else is going on? And we are also implementing here the functionality for uploading a file. So you will be able to select a file from your desktop and then uploaded it to the given bucket that we created. And then when the model is selected, when the model is given model is selected from the dropdown, then we are going to be calling this endpoint in order to check the status of the translation, the SVF translation of the given model, if it's finished already. And then based on that, we are just going to display some messages like the model has not been translated, how far it progressed, or if for any reason the translation failed. As some of you mentioned it already, in case of really big models, sometimes it happens, but it could be for other reasons as well. So maybe there is an issue with the file, or as I said, when you uploaded the file, maybe something went wrong. It can happen. But if everything is okay with it, with the status, the translation status of the given file to SVF, then we will just simply load the model. And this function is then implemented inside the viewer .js file. So load model. And that's really it. That's all we have. And as I said, this time around, these tutorials are even simpler than the previous ones were on the learnforge.autodesk.io page. You don't have any, fancy tree control JavaScript libraries, or not even using like Bootstrap, things like that. We kept it, very simple. And now we are adding the user interface. This can go directly inside the www router. Okay, so this time around, we are just putting everything directly in the www router. Okay. In the previous tutorial, we had like separate subfolders for it, but makes no difference really. Okay, so again, getting back to this one. So we are creating an index.html file directly in the root. And then just rename it straight away to the index.html. And as you can see, the content is really simple. That's all there is to it, really. We have some header section, preview, overlay, and then referencing, of course, the scripts that we implemented, and including, of course, the viewer SDK as well. So let's just select everything and overwrite it. So we have some information about, what exactly we added there. We have the select with the drop downs for the files, which are available already inside the bucket that we created. Then we'll have the upload button to upload new models. And now the style sheet that is quite straightforward as well. So again, just right click on the www root folder and then select, this time around it should be a style sheet, but we are renaming it straight away anyway. So it's called main.css. And then just copy the whole thing. Yeah, so there are a couple of notes here. Like all web pages, it's going to be looking for a favicon icon or icon. And logo PNG images under the www root folder. So you can add these if you want. If you don't add them, then that's not a problem either, but you can simply just fetch them from here if you wanted to. And that really should be it. So just for fun, you can also fetch some of the sample files if you don't already have any files that you want to give a try, then you can just fetch them from here. So let's download something. REC basic sample project. Actually, I should be doing it from my Parallels instance. Yeah, so let's go with this one. Okay. Showing folder just to make sure I have it. Okay, so directly it's in the downloads. Yeah, but hopefully everything should be okay with it. There's nothing else really to do. So let's give this a try. As usual, you have to wait a bit. Yeah, so since we don't have the logo yet, so it's missing, but you don't have to care about that. And now I can click the upload button and just navigate to the file. So this is the file, the sample file that I just downloaded. Hope my internet is a bit faster than last time. It was, for some reason, the speed exactly went down at the wrong moment. And it just took way too much time. I guess I should have tried with a simpler model, but let's see how this one goes first. Ah, he's there. And it already kicked off the translation. Model is being translated, 0% complete. Let's hope it's not going to be sitting in the queue for too long. Yeah, it's already started something. 22. Yeah, almost there. Yay, it's all working, great. So here's the sample. And this is the extension I talked to you about, the document browser. So if we go back to the viewer.js part, you can see when we are setting up, initializing the viewer and creating a new instance of it, then we can provide the extensions that we want to be loaded by default. So one of them is this Autodesk.document browser. So when I come here, it will create this additional button in the toolbar. And when you click this, it will list all the various views which are available inside the file. So there are a couple of file formats which have these, multiple views in the same file, like Revit files, DWG files, DWF, and DWFX files. There might be other ones as well, which can have multiple views in it. So 3D view, it could be multiple 3D views as well in case of Revit, plus 2D views as well, various sheets which are available. And using this document browser extension, you can just easily bring up this nice nice dialog where all the available views are listed, and you can just switch between them. So you can see what got translated from the original model. Yeah, and I think that's really it. So if you have any questions, then just do let me know. I will answer I will answer as soon as I can. Yep, so we reached the very last part today, which is just a Q&A. I hope you all managed to implement everything in this last section as well, and your application is working. So this last section was about adding now the viewer logic, all the UI components, including the HTML page and also the style sheet for it. So tomorrow we'll have a sort of similar session, but in that case we are going to be accessing folders and files from the various storage storages, Autodesk storages that are available for our customers. It could be ACC, BIM 360 Docs, and others like Fusion Team. Then on Wednesday, it will be about extending the functionality of the viewer, creating various extensions, but focusing on dashboards. So basically extracting all the valuable information, properties from the given model, and then create dashboards out of them, like what kind of materials are being used in the model and so on. And then based on that, for example, creating a pie chart or something like that. And then finally on Thursday, you'll talk about configurators, in which case if you want to create new Autodesk specific file formats like Inventor, Revit, AutoCAD, or modify existing files of those types, then you can use something called Design Automation Service. And that is what we are going to be using in that sample on Thursday. If you need more help, probably the easiest way is if you just go on Stack Overflow. There are a couple of tags that you can use in order to make sure that your question will get to us into our own internal support system, including Autodesk Forge, Viewer, Model Derivative, Design Automation. And you can also go to the Forge developer portal. So you just go to support and then get help. That will list the same thing as well. So that will list this Stack Overflow support. If you don't want to discuss it in public, we also have an email that is available in the facts section, FAQ section of the Get Help part, which is forge.help@autodesk.com. Yeah, so after the event, there should be an email with links to session recordings on YouTube, links to slides used during the sessions, survey link in order to get some feedback from you. And if you want to get more skills related to Forge, then you can attend one of our accelerators. So an accelerator is a week-long event when we are creating a Slack channel dedicated to all the attendees who are there. So you have to present what kind of project you would like to be working on, and then we will be there to help you, implement all that. We also have a couple of Forge Lightning talks available at this link, forge.autodesk.com/lightning talks. That's worth checking out. And of course, we also have a blog, which is forge.autodesk.com/blog, with loads of articles already related to the various components in the Forge environment. When something interesting comes up, an interesting question, or something that many people keep asking about, then we are definitely creating a blog post for those topics. So you can find all those on the Forge blog. So that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining, and then goodbye.